Welcome to the U.S. Manufacturing Today podcast, your hub of information about the U.S. manufacturing and distribution industry. Brought to you by Variable, the on-demand labor solution revitalizing and optimizing your operation, enabling just-in-time response to demand, more efficient production, and lower cost per unit. And now your host and head of reindustrialization at Variable, Matt Horine.
Welcome to U.S. Manufacturing Today, the podcast powered by Variable, where we talk with the leaders, innovators, and changemakers shaping the future of American industry, along with providing regular updates on the state of manufacturing, the changing policy landscape, and more. Today, we're talking about the future of manufacturing, not just how factories operate today, but where they're headed as Industry 4.0 gives way to Industry 5.0, and what that evolution means for the people on the plant floor and the leaders guiding them through change. Our guest today is A.W. Schultz, founder and principal consultant of A.W. Schultz Training and Industrial Transformation, an Amazon bestselling author, international speaker, and one of the most recognized thought leaders in maintenance, reliability, and industrial transformation. Aaron has spent more than 25 years working in manufacturing across some of the world's largest companies, including Fortune 500 organizations in food and beverage, chemicals, oil and gas, med devices, pharmaceuticals, and more. He holds 2 bachelor's degrees in agricultural systems and manufacturing and engineering, an MBA, and is currently pursuing a doctorate in organizational change. Aaron is perhaps best known for his work on adaptive work management, a human-centered framework for navigating industrial change, and for being one of the leading voices in the United States on Industry 5.0, the next era of manufacturing built on sustainability, resilience, and putting people back at the center of the factory of the future. He is also the host of a podcast called Factory of the Future Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about what the shift from Industry 4.0 to 5.0 really means for manufacturers, why asset management and reliability are more critical than ever, and how leaders can build organizations capable of thriving in an era of rapid transformation. A.W., welcome to the show.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me. It's great being on another podcast once in a while where I get to talk about what's going on with me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you. It's great to have other hosts on from time to time and sometimes get on the other side of the microphone for me as well. So a lot of exciting topics today to cover, but first, want to dive into your background. Let's start with your journey. You spent over 25 years in manufacturing across a wide range of industries and roles. What drew you to this field and what has kept you passionate about it?
I'm going to say it started in high school, and it started with, I don't know what I want to do. And I was working at a pasta manufacturing plant when I was, I want to say 16 years old. A horrible job for a 16-year-old boy that their whole job was counting to 10 and putting lasagnas into a box. I kept on doing it, and then eventually I moved into other positions, and I would say I still wasn't all that good of an employee because my mind drifted, and I got the pleasure of sometimes working with my friends, which teenage boys, probably not the best thing. Came to a point where I decided to go to school. Manufacturing, there's stability there, and it's always going to be there. So that kind of led me into that realm on that. So spent a lot of time in the food and beverage, went into the oil and gas, pharmaceutical, and then up to this point, I've done several different ventures, but always had fun. And I tell people that touring a factory to me is more fun than going to Disney World.
For people who are into manufacturing, that's absolutely the case. We were at a factory just last week looking at some of these advanced engineered processes, and it's like somebody tapped me on the shoulder if I stopped too long and watched the process play out. Definitely get that feeling all the time. Now, you worked hands-on inside some of the world's largest manufacturing organizations. How did those frontline experiences shape the way you now coach and consult and moving from a corporate role to founding your own firm?
I've had the privilege of working with what I would say is some of the best in the business, the experts into it, and having their tutelage was mind-blowing for myself. And it taught me some of the real-world gaps between strategy and execution. Like I say, like you mentioned, I coach and consult on it. And I'm biased for the fact that I've been in both roles, both as an operator, a mechanic, and a supervisor, and then in the corporate role, and now in the consulting. So it's fun. I relate to it. And I often walk into these sites and I see this vicious cycle that just continues to move on or around.
Yeah, it's definitely one that's a common theme throughout manufacturing. And like you said, you've been in a number of different industries, and it seems to be very common across all of them. What's the most common part of that thread across those different verticals, foods, chemicals, oil and gas, when it comes to performance and reliability challenges?
They've got a poor integration. They've got weak change management. There's project management. I often tell the story that I'll come in and offer continuous improvement processes and iterations, and the leaders will go, how do we know when it's working? Because it's a delayed process. And for me, I tell them, you know when it's working because the employees, they start talking different. And talking different means where at one point there was finger pointing going back and forth about maintenance didn't support this, operations, quality should have talked this. But when they start talking about the process that's in place, that is mean they're making that transition into a more mature manufacturing workplace, a smart manufacturing. And for me, that's when my shoulders urge back, and I'm very proud that they're starting to make that transition, because I can't take them all the way through it, but there's the point where you just got to let go, and that's usually the point where, especially in leadership, they need to know that you may not need me anymore because you're going down that right realm. And working with a lot of these people, they're very smart. It's just opening up that box that opens them up to start looking at things versus a process standpoint that can, foster growth.
Right. I think you hit something on the head there for me. When I think about teams or manufacturing environments, there's a lot of talking about bad outcomes versus talking about the actual process. And when you hear teams shift that dialogue from talking about the state of the way things are to like how they're going to fix it and working through a process and being responsible, it's delegated, it's to the right person. There's that kind of critical point where the person on the shop floor knows they're playing their part, and it all starts to flow a little better when it's that more critically defined. So really great insight. I want to shift now and talk a little bit more about Industry 4.0, which you've spoken on a lot. We hear a lot about it: smart factories, IoT, automation, data-driven operation. Where do manufacturers actually stand today in that Industry 4.0 journey?
For those that I circle around, they're well within the 4.0. And you think about the 4.0, like you just said, the Internet of Things, putting that big data up in the cloud, pulling it down, running algorithms on it, the sensors, the robotics, all that cool stuff that when you do a Google search that pops up with these robots doing these things, that's your Industry 4.0. And that's the technology of today. What the gap is, and I'm doing a lot of research on this, and particularly what's going into 4.0 and what's evolving into 5.0, is 32% of industrial operations investments don't meet the expectations that they were expected to deliver on. And for me, this is something that gets my little squirrel start running around in the little wheel, is asking the question why. And in many of these cases, it's the innovation of not involving the people in the process of it. So just quick history on it. Industrial 1 was about the automation of steam and power. 2 was with the factory floor and electricity and driving forces, railroads and stuff like that. 3 is actually the introduction of circuitry and computers, sensors. 4 is the mammoth of what we talked about, the Internet of Things and everything that goes into that. And then 5 took a big step. So it was in 2021, European Commission was asking the question, how do we need to take what we're doing with all this technology and derive it to sustainable goods? And this was driven by the Paris Accord agreement and the expectations of being net zero by 2050. Now, I don't hear a lot of talk about that anymore, at least in the last year, but there's still a lot of traction around organizations that are trying to drive that. Now, Industry 5.0 takes what everything Industry 4.0 had, resiliency and driving that technology, but it also puts 2 things on the fact that I just mentioned, that 32% of an industry struggle on meeting the expectations of what they thought they were going to get out of this technology. One big aspect of it is the people side, the human-centric approach. And especially when you talk about Gen Z, there's a new way of managing. And in addition to it, Industry 5.0 is a drive on sustainability. So how do we do more with less? And what can we do to help both the environment, but become more efficient at what we're doing?
It's something that you don't realize is going on right in front of you, because I think as you defined it there, the gap between installing technology and actually transforming operations, that 32% that you cited seems to be the experience of a lot of people when they talked about automation and they talked about IoT. We've had guests on that talked about IoT in the sense it's like you're making like an automatic fish feeder, right? Like what granular level can we get down to here where it's, hey, this has reached the end of its potential value creation, especially if the people aren't bought in. And that focus on digitization, automation, connectivity, there was a lot of buzz around it. And I think it's transformed a lot of things. And like you said, you can go Google it and you'll see these great automation setups on YouTube or anywhere else. But now integrating that piece of it, since you led into what is now being called Industry 5.0, you are one of the leading voices in the US on this. It's for manufacturers who haven't heard the term. I've heard it maybe once or twice before this call. So in full disclosure, this is fairly new to me as well. How do you explain what the core of that Industry 5.0 is and how it differs from what came before? And I know you mentioned sustainability. That has translated more into people's minds go directly to like environmental type scenarios. But what it also means is reliability and resilience, which you noted. So curious to hear if somebody hasn't heard that term, how do you explain it even in more depth?
Yeah, so it's on three principles. It's resiliency, sustainability, and a human-centric approach. And for me, I was working on my next book, and I was going into adaptive work management and driving sustainable change within organizations. And then I came across it, and like I mentioned earlier, the Interbeer Commission they're coined with creating that term. And it's really just saying that this is the next step in our evolution of what we're walking into. And it's nothing bad. It's what we're expecting for change. And for me, I circle around the idea that the human-centric approach about how organizations treat their people and how do you get their buy-in to drive some of the results onto that. Now, I said that 32% of industrials struggled to bring organizations up to it, but I would argue that most of those organizations don't involve the people aspect of into it. Asking the questions about why we're taking this change. What are your feedbacks onto it? So we look at continuous improvement in early management. One of the core things that you usually want to do, especially in the project management aspect of it, is involve those that are going to be part of it. And one of the struggles that 4.0 has, you think about this scenario, that the average person works in their position about 3 years. And then after that, they move on. So even if you do early management, project management of installation of new technologies, the best you can, that person's involved. And what happens? They leave. And then what's usually the common scenario that they have to do? They have them shadow the next best qualified person if it's not that person that's already there. And then all of a sudden, all that the tribal knowledge that, well, it's documented, but nobody sits there and reads the manuals. Then you've got this new person that's running the machines or this technologies, and there's gaps. And the idea of 5.0 is let's put as much effort into the technology as we do the people side of it. That's, I think, what's the turning point on where 4.0 struggles. And for me, I remember I was doing 4.0 before it was even a term. It became a term in 2011 in Germany. And I remember it was 2008 and I'm working on this automation line trying to figure out what's the driving factor, what's changing everything. And first of all, the entire staff has turned over 3 times. The equipment is dirty. And in this particular case, they were neglecting some of the critical maintenance that was going on in this case. So that's the driving forces. That's, for me, I'm giving you an example of what 5.0 is, but where I've seen 4 and 5 and where I see the next evolution of companies that are going to be successful with it.
That does bring in a big question from my side, because you think about it in that linear time step, right? You just walked us through 1.0 through 4. It's not necessarily, from what I'm gathering, a rejection of technology, but more of a rebalancing, if that's an accurate way to see it. And does it replace 4.0 or does it stack on top of it neatly with just this rebalancing that you've described?
Yes, exactly what you did. And I like how you say rebalancing, because that's really what it is. You have to put the investment in the people just as much as you're putting into the new technology.
Yeah, no, that's really spot on. It's what we see a lot of at Variable, where we talk with manufacturers every day, is kind of like labor being the key constraint. And we tend to try to knock down a lot of those phrases where they say, oh, there's a there's a labor shortage. There's a labor access issue because it's not really centric to like, how has the environment changed? How have people gone to work differently over the past decade? But do people want options and choice and being able to choose where they're going to work? So we see a lot of that, and that kind of rebalancing is you'll walk into a plant that's quote unquote fully automated, but the need for labor is still pretty extensive. And they're having trouble filling that last gap because they're trying to do it in a very traditional way, old school way, where they staff a plant or they build to an exact head count. It's a different environment altogether.
Yeah, Matt, we got in the discussion earlier before about the staffing issues, and a lot of it's more of a technical issue because you're walking into a technical position that requires a depth of knowledge into it. But I think McKinsey is saying by 2030, we're going to have 3.8 million job openings in the manufacturing sector, which is staggering, which also forces us into the idea of this is why we pick automation, but then we're spinning our wheels that we think that this automation is going to drive the performance. And then we still lack on the people side of it. Best case is we inject a lot of automation in it. Worst case is we do it overseas and we have to bring it over. And then that's money lost for the US.
That's definitely even the theme of our show is talking about the state of US manufacturing, the reshoring buzzword, reindustrialization word. What does it actually mean in practice? Which means that none of the traditional stakeholders or some of the pillars go away. There's a need for labor. There's a need for technology. There's a need for all these things to keep up with what is frankly turning into the 21st century arms race. Is people realizing that their industrial base is more critical to them than anything they could do diplomatically or militarily, because if without it, you're left pretty exposed. So you did hit a key word there when you talked about adaptive. You've developed a framework called adaptive work management. Can you walk us through what that is and the problem it's designed to solve?
I coined this phrase because when I go into a lot of different facilities, I often find myself having to be adaptive to the cultures that they have. When I first started this adaptive work management, this was a couple of years ago, and it led into Industry 5.0, driving that human-centric approach. But in adaptive work management, it's coming in and looking at this is the scenario they have. Now, it's not a cookie cutter approach. Every facility's got their own little stories that go along with it. But how can you I'm going to use the word adaptive on driving some of the change on it? And it's a very fundamental project management approach. One of the things I was doing when I was working on this book, which was never published, but I was researching on it. I was interviewing people from all over the world and different industries. And the approach was very similar, but just it comes down to that building an understanding of what the individuals are looking for and what they want to drive for performance. A lot of organizations, they've got metrics and KPIs. And I frankly, I'm embarrassed that we still look at some of these KPIs. We should be tracking something more relevant. And if you're an executive and you're looking at PM completion rates, just throw it out the door because they're fixed. And there's many different things out there that are relevant metrics, but important, but they're on your performance reviews. So that's something that it doesn't drive change. If you're looking at important metrics, to me, it's your org health surveys or your turnover or filling vacant positions, and it's the actual output that you're getting out of it. Too often we look at some of these inputs, you've got your leading indicators and your lagging indicators. And I'd argue some of your lagging indicators maybe be something more simple. It's got to be simple. It's got to be something that you're sharing with your employees on a daily basis and talking about your wins and challenging the losses and what we need to do to fix them. That's really what adaptive work management is, just understanding the culture they have and being flexible on what you're walking into the scenario.
Yeah, that's a really critical point because a lot of change management practices are cookie cutter. They don't take into consideration the type of organization. And I don't mean that. What vertical are they manufacturing? And I mean that in like their history and all those things that you touched on there that are very specific to each organization. That's great. And you've seen these types of transformations succeed and fail. What separates the percent of failures from success that the majority, I'm assuming the majority don't get the change management that they're seeing, but what's the critical factor for the change succeeding?
It's always leadership. I like it, yes, and I answer really quick because that's what it always is. For my organization, I've used to do consulting and they'd bring me in and they would have what they perceive the problem to be. And I'd have to politically correct on some of the things that they need to do. And one of the things I'm changing is So I'm doing these mastermind workshops in Industry 4.0. And the whole premise is, let's talk about what we need to do as far as a people. And I'm not going 5.0 because I think it goes over their head. So I go 4.0. But the idea is every organization I go into, I always see the same problem. And addressing these problems early, understanding change management, understanding you have got good governance as far as the regulatories you have into it. Those are the things that define good from great. Understanding the maturity level. And it's okay if your maturity level isn't at the ideal state, but understanding where you're at gives you a good aspect to understand where you need to go next. And too often organizations come into, and I want to be world-class. There's a lot of changes to become world-class, and it's a cultural thing. It's not just buying it. That's part of where I've done a lift and shift from where I was doing more consulting to where I'm doing more training. And I'm seeing that as organizations, I think, can feed their organizations better through understanding that you need to have a good understanding, be honest with yourself where you're at, because not all organizations can afford to make that big investments. And I've been in world-class organizations or factories, and often I've seen them go out of business and they had a world-class manufacturing facility, but the product they produced wasn't relevant anymore. They're not. They're gone.
No, that's exactly right. You think about some of the big names in manufacturing. I don't have the stat in front of me, but the names 100 years ago are not the names today. There's a few of them sprinkled in, but they weren't there for the long haul because either the product became irrelevant or...
General Electric is one of them. And really, I remember doing a presentation on it, and it was General Electric. And I can't think of any others.
Yeah, something triggered as soon as you said it. So there was a stat on the companies that were, whether it was what they were listed at on the stock exchange, or I can't remember where I saw that, and I'll go back and find that maybe. But a lot of it did have to do with some types of change management because they weren't adaptive and they weren't flexible to new operating environments. They were just used to being the incumbent and working in the way that they always had. I think one of the things that when we first talked, that kind of separated your methodology and what stood out to me was the concept of asset management and reliability in the smart factory. You spent a lot of your career within asset management and maintenance and those things. They're the core of your work. Why does getting this right matter more than ever in this new age of smart factories and where it's going with the more human-centric approach?
I think it's always mattered. The one thing I'm fascinated with the new generations because they do have options to do something else. And one of the things I'm vocal for is STEM, is just introducing people to manufacturing. It's a good, solid, lifelong career if you're open to it. And you can, there's manufacturing everywhere. And getting the door isn't often that hard, especially when there's 3.8 million jobs going to be open by 2030. And the new generations, it requires a new type of leadership that's more, that's why I'm passionate about 5.0 because it talks about human-centric, human centricity. So where we once we had muscle and then we had machines, and now we're going back to the people side about it. The human and the machine portion of it plays a critical factor into it. So if you're a leader on it and you're not addressing some of these human needs, there's cause for concerns. You know, what's funny is so in my podcast, I got a guy coming on in a couple of weeks, and he's got some background in manufacturing, but one thing was he spent 10 years in prison for bank robbery. And I've never talked to a bank robber before. And he was telling me, but I also worked in a prison manufacturing plant. We made furniture. And I go, well, what's the difference between a manufacturing plant? And he does consulting in manufacturing also today, software. And he goes, you know what the difference is between working in a manufacturing in a prison versus others in the normal concept? Nothing. They feel and look the same. And I was just like, yes, exactly. It feels like a prison in there. So if you're addressing the human-centric approach to it, things change. I had another guest on, he works in the automotive. And honestly, he said, I don't really have any background in automotive. I want to tour an automotive plant really bad. And he was talking about, we made changes to these machines over the years. And all of a sudden we didn't have to wear earplugs. And I whoa, you don't have to wear earplugs? I thought that was just safety default. And no, because we understood the employees' needs so much that the machines were so quiet that we didn't hear earplugs anymore. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is a change that's new to me.
Yeah, that's funny that you said that about the earplugs, because that's a really dialed in example of, I think, exactly what you're talking about is I could walk into any manufacturing plant today and they've probably got like the earplug, iPro helmet. Safety is cultural, right? And if it's so quiet that you don't need earplugs, what are we doing? Everybody's putting earplugs in. And so that's just as a really minute detail. I thought you were going another direction there for a second when you said that guest was doing consulting. I was worried you were going to say going to prison consulting or something like that. But so that's a really interesting point because there is a lot of manufacturing. I know there's like the old, do they make license plates kind of things. I've been to the state prison here in Texas on a tour for something completely unrelated. And they were manufacturing, they were making things, all kinds of stuff. And we toured through that and it's like, it looks like a manufacturing line. And this was before my career was actually in college. It's pretty incredible because it's a pretty simple process that's laid out in a certain way. And when you get down to the root of all of it, it's like you are making something. And so that level of productivity is critical to people feeling valued and feeling like they're contributing and building something. And that extends into manufacturing. And I like also, you framed this really nicely right at the outset of the question, was the newer generation does have choices today. And I think the first guest that I've had on that said, they haven't framed it in a way it's like, we've got to get more people into manufacturing. It's like, because there's nothing else to do. People have implied that other things are going a different way. And now this is an alternate route. It is a route among many. And it's becoming one that is like much more attractive to people in Gen Z. Like we talk a lot about Gen Z and what they like to do. But these factories of the future are the automation, the technology, everything that goes into it. It's a choice. And I think I really liked how you framed that up front was they're lining that up against other things and people are choosing manufacturing. So maybe that was the first time someone said it to me where it really stood out. It was like, no, people are choosing this. This isn't some like pipeline to fill. It's critical, obviously, but it's something that is great and really cool. And people are taking it in consideration across a broad spectrum of potential careers. So I wanted to note that because it was a really good observation. I don't think anybody's framed it that way. A little bit more about the reliability maintenance. Just because we have you on, this is an area of subject expertise for you. There's a difference between reactive maintenance, preventative maintenance, and predictive maintenance. Where are most manufacturers at today and where do they need to be?
So yeah, everyone wants to be in predictive maintenance, or there's not even another term out, they can't think of it. But you need to understand, it's expensive. So predictive maintenance was developed by NASA and Boeing back in the 1960s because those 747s that they were making, they didn't want them falling out of the sky. So they wanted to be predictive on it versus being reactive on it. And up to that point, we typically fell within that planned maintenance, reactive maintenance, so on. But one of the things I teach on is understanding where to go. Now, in oil and gas, I spend a lot of time, it's predictive, it's time-based, it's wear-based, it's analyzed, it's not. Other industries, you don't necessarily have to be predictive maintenance. I can tell you my house, most of the stuff in my house is run to failure, except, and you're a Texan guy, except for my air conditioning. It really comes down to is what I usually go through is an asset management process onto it. And it was funny because I was in Africa a couple of years ago doing planning and scheduling workshop at an energy plant in Ghana. And I'm talking about some things you can let wear out because the cost of having it on your inventory or in your storeroom has a cost to it. And then I remember like, hey, AW, we can't because it's not like the US. Like in Houston or I'm in Dallas, is we can get stuff in hours. It takes them a year to get a product in or a component in. And it's okay, so when you do a criticality analysis of your assets, you may have more predictive maintenance on it versus reactive. Because I think especially in the regions we're at, I always argue that it's kind of like the 80-20 rule there. 20% of your assets should be considered critical and have a scenario to what's going to happen if it goes down. And then the other 80%, whether it's planned or reactive, certainly understanding what your cost of downtime is. And especially, how long it takes to get a component in, or there's some skill set or discovery learning that has to go into it. But I'm passionate about that comment. The easy answer is everyone should be predictive. But I think you got to, at an executive level, take the concept of, okay, I want this to be reactive, and I want it to be reactive because I don't want to pay the cost of it. And if you think about your house as an example, there's certain things in our house that they can fail. Say my stove breaks, guess what? We're having something in the microwave tonight or something. we're getting Uber Eats, but that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good example because I've had an HVAC guy describe it to me before and say, outside of your car, this is like the engine of the house. In Texas, certainly. And it's probably the most expensive system that goes into any home build. And people don't think about it like their car. You go get an oil change, you go do those things. So you are a little bit predictive. Being reactive is a horrible state, especially if it's happening between May to November at this point. I feel like that's how long the heat goes on. At least that's what my electric bill says. That's a really good point. I think one of the areas to tap into a little bit more, reliability is a foundation for everything. You can't be sustainable, productive, or competitive if your assets are constantly failing. But you're tying this back to the people-centric side. You have a strong point of view on leadership, which we were talking about earlier. Why is leadership the critical variable in whether the manufacturing organization transforms successfully? We hear a lot of people talking about if the team is bought in and they're leveled up. Is it some of those expectations that they have that go in that you have to knock down first that you were describing earlier? Or what's the critical point of that?
Oh, I think a bottleneck is the leadership and the ego of leaving the ego at the door. That for myself, when I came out of college and I started as a supervisor, I thought I knew everything. You can tell by my early introductions, I've learned more over the years, and that if you're not listening to the people and having that conversation, there's that barrier, that silo, that your perception and the reality of it are two different things. That's my one takeaway is find a format that works, that's opening up discussion, not just checking the box saying you're having your quarterly meeting with the staff or the plant meeting and saying that this is what we're going to be doing, but being open to continuous feedback and creating that funnel so you can react to it before it becomes a problem. And it sounds simple, but it's just one of those steps that you have to take. And so often I see the opposite, especially it's sad. It's sad really, because often you think a new person is hired, and I'm going to use this as an example. They say it takes between 6 and 18 months before they actually start being productive. I can't remember which one it is, but it's a long process where I've been in facilities where the plant manager has been out in 6 months and they've had no chance to try to develop and change a culture, and they're moving on to something different.
That does happen. I think summed up, there are a lot of people that become way too invested in what is supposed to be a hypothesis, right? About this is what we think. And instead of that, it becomes the party line. And then you're faced with the reality of some of that political situation that you described earlier. So really great point. This is the part of the show where I ask folks who come on for what I call free advice. So this is, if you were talking to a plant manager or an ops leader watching their industry change rapidly, where do they start when it comes to preparing for this, for what we believe is the next wave of Industry 5.0?
It's leading with courage, data, and heart. That's as simple as it is. One way you could become the most dangerous person in the room is one, you begin to trust your people, be data-driven, and think beyond the schedule. So think about the future. And for me, if that's one takeaway that others could let simmer, that would be my give back to them. And if you understand that, you've already made the first step.
So if our listeners are listening today, they want to find out more about Industry 5.0, more about the work that you're doing. I know you're pursuing a doctorate in organizational change. Where can they go to learn more about you, maybe listen to your podcast?
Yeah, so we're going to be having a podcast, or it's factorofthefuturepodcast.com. If you want to reach out to me, if you do a Google search, A.W. Schultz, I pop up quite a bit. And I'd be more excited to connect with you, everyone else on LinkedIn, and answer any questions that you have. But yeah. And Matt, it was a pleasure being on your show. This is a lot of fun. This is great.
Yeah, it was a great show. Great having you on. And thanks for clearing up. I'd heard Industry 5.0 maybe once or twice before. So this was the topic that was really of interest to me and brought a lot of insight. So thanks for coming on today.
Thank you.
Manufacturing performance ultimately comes down to one thing: how effectively organizations harness both their technology and their people to create consistent, reliable, and sustainable output. Industry 4.0 gave manufacturers the digital tools to transform, and 5.0 is the call to use those tools in a way that's more human, more resilient, and more sustainable, and to build leadership culture required to make it last. To stay ahead of the curve and to help plan your strategy, please check out our website at variableops.com and under the resources section titled Trump 2.0, where you can see the framework around upcoming policies from the administration and how they will impact you as a manufacturer. If you're on socials, give us a follow on LinkedIn, X, Truth, or Instagram. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free to follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube and leave us a rating, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for joining us and learning more about how you can make your way.